Today is part of an Orange webinar series called Business Resilience in All Times. Throughout this series, our objective is to provide information and thought leadership supporting businesses through the COVID pandemic and beyond. We have 20 webinars across 3 series categories. Today's presentation is from our next normal series where we will be looking at entertainment. The other 2 are enterprise solutions and leading with partners, both brought to you by our colleagues at Orange Business Services. Today's session is hosted by Orange Silicon Valley. We at OSV are a team of technologists that fosters innovation, serving as guides to the digital revolution in Silicon Valley for Orange and its customers. My name is Derek O. I am an investment principal here at Orange and your host for this webinar. Today's topic is on entertainment. We will be looking at various segments within the entertainment industry, followed by a conversation with Marcel Samick and Shane Robinson Weaver, a very exciting company pioneering the creation of immersive worlds. Weaver is also a portfolio company of Orange Digital Ventures. My colleague Guillaume Payan will manage the Q&As. He will also join in our conversation with Weaver at the end. We will start by looking at the state of various segments within the entertainment industry. I will highlight secular themes that have been underway for some time and speak to the ones that have been accelerated or derailed by the impact of COVID-19. Finally, we will end by looking at what's coming next. Throughout the presentation, you may enter your questions in the chat area on the right side of your screen. Your questions will be public. If you wish to ask questions privately, you may submit them in the questions area on the right side. Guillaume will collect your questions and we will address them at the very end. With that out of the way, let's get started. Beginning with traditional pay TV multi-channel. This is a segment that has been in secular decline for years. The sector started logging its first annual net loss in 2013. In 2019, the sector lost 3.8 million households, 6.4 million if you combine residential and commercial subscriber loss. That's 7.1% of the total subscriber base. From 2013 to 2019, the sector lost 14 million households. In 2019, only 62% of US occupied homes subscribe to traditional multi-channel. This is down from the 87% peak in 2008, after which the trend began to decline following the Great Recession. Much of this is demographic driven. Cord cutting is more acute among younger age groups. Cord nevers are highest among the 18 to 34 age. The downward pressure on multi-channel is amplified by COVID-19. US jobless claims have surpassed 40 million. Cable TV bills, which have been steadily increasing in cost, has finally become unaffordable for many. Already in Q1, the big 4 pay TV providers saw an exodus of nearly 2 million customers, with AT&T's DirecTV accounting for almost half of those cancellations. Another reason for the acceleration of cord cutting is due to the suspension of live sports. Regular sports viewers are more likely to subscribe to pay TV compared with non-sports viewers. In other words, sports viewers are the stickiest among pay TV customers. Among US internet users who regularly watch sports, 79% have a traditional pay TV service compared with just 61% for non-sports viewers. Subscription fees make up the lion's share of revenues for the cable operators, with industry-wide totals at around 40 billion. Programmers are being less aggressive with price hikes due to the declining linear TV viewership. ESPN Sports content commands a premium. 95% of the network's content is consumed live and is ad-supported. It lost 20 million subscribers since its peak in 2011. During the first 4 months of 2020, ESPN lost 1.7% of its paying subscribers. Without live sports, linear TV networks such as ESPN are struggling to fill the schedule gaps. It's unclear whether programming substitutions will be enough to satisfy sports fans, particularly if cancellations and postponements continue for several months. S&P Global Market Intelligence estimates that ESPN will lose 9% of total subscribers by the end of 2020, leaving them with around 76.8 million or so subscribers. And so who benefited from the COVID pandemic? Well, cable news spiked as viewers turned into COVID coverage. But there's been a paradox. In spite of the captive audience for television, ad revenue has plummeted primarily with loss of retail, leisure, and travel advertising sponsors. Here we see that while pay TV multi-channel is on the decline, over the top, over the air, and virtual multi-channel are all growing. S&P's Kagan estimates that online-only households is expected to surpass combined traditional and virtual multi-channel subscribers. When we drill down into OTT, we see that explosive demand for TV content led almost 16 million people to sign up for Netflix, more than double what the company predicted before the COVID-19 outbreak. Sheltering in place has given consumers a chance to try out new services, including Disney+, Apple TV+, Quibi, and Comcast's Peacock. And according to a Park Associates survey of more than 10,000 households of broadband head of broadband households conducted between March 8th and April 13th, or April 3rd, 81% of Disney Plus subscribers subscribed to Netflix, as did 72% of Apple TV Plus subscribers. Nearly one half of Disney Plus subscribers canceled another OTT service over the last 12 months, as did roughly 2/3 of Apple TV Plus subscribers. At the beginning of May, Disney announced that it had 54.5 million Disney Plus subscribers. At the end of Q1 in December, Disney Plus had 26.5 million subscribers. That's 28 million subscriber additions in the first 5 months of the year. Meanwhile, movie box office admissions collapsed. Here you see year-over-year and weekly changes. With movie theaters shut down, movie releases are being postponed. The industry is maintaining the theater release window to protect the movie theater experience. But the longer the COVID-19 pandemic plays out, this may change as studios switch to direct-to-VOD release. Universal Studios was the first to go in this direction, releasing Trolls World Tour in global theaters and through VOD on the same day. Frozen 2 was released on Disney Plus on March 15th in the US due to COVID-19. They shortened the home entertainment window by approximately 3 months so audience could enjoy the film on Disney Plus early. We will see whether these kinds of adjustments become pervasive and permanent. As we think about secular trends and changes in viewer habits, another theme that has emerged is the shift away from television to mobile devices as the dominant method of consuming media. And so you see concepts like Quibi that targets on-the-go viewers. Quibi streams custom content to mobile devices for commuters. Quibi suffered the great misfortune of launching during shelter in place and so lost its target audience as everybody was stuck at home. Another new arrival is TikTok, an app used to create very short dance, lip sync, comedy, and talent videos. According to Sensor Tower, TikTok is the first app after Facebook's WhatsApp, Instagram, and Messenger to break past the 2 billion downloads. And then comes geopolitics. In late 2019, the US began investigating TikTok for security reasons. More recently, India banned TikTok among other apps, stemming from disputes with China. Gaming has also been a beneficiary. Without sports, consumers are turning to gaming consoles, playing for hours on end. Verizon said that while video usage on its network was up 40%, gaming saw an increase of 200% in network traffic. In-game purchases are also taking off, and they've become a revenue generator during the lockdown for publishers such as Electronic Arts. Video games even got a reversal of endorsement from the World Health Organization. With the physical world going offline, entertainment has gone exclusively online. Online gaming platforms are seeing huge numbers of users. Big players like Sony with Dreams and Activision Blizzard with Call of Duty Warzone are also entering the space. And so when we look at Twitch, which is a platform for people to watch sports, esports, and other players streaming video games live, we see that viewership has taken off since the end of 2019. And so moving on to the next, PwC says that VR has the highest growth potential in the next 5 years. Gartner believes VR has matured to the point of being real. In other words, it's here to stay. Note that VR is no longer even on their emerging technologies hype cycle. It dropped off in 2018. Valve, which is a company that makes video games, headsets, and Steam, a gaming app store, they reported that the number of monthly connected VR headsets has been steadily increasing since 2016. The connectivity can be viewed as a barometer of VR adoption. And so moving on to a recent Kagan Consumer Insights survey, they found that consumers say that the top 3 content of interest when it comes to VR are movies, video games, and amusement park experiences. And so this leads us to our guest today from Weaver, a studio that produces award-winning VR content that is at the intersection of these 3 areas. They are the leaders in creating immersive worlds. So thank you, Marcel and Shane, for joining us, and welcome. So before we get into what Weaver does, perhaps Marcel and Shane, a little bit about your background and generally what led you to join Weaver, but more importantly, the immersive world venture reality ecosystem.
Well, since Shane is muted, I will start off first. I started my career in the VFX industry straight out of college, and had a blast in the VFX industry for a while. And then in the early 2000s, I left that industry and went into video games. And I went into video games at the time because the PlayStation 2 was just coming out. And it was a time when I looked at the hardware and you could actually start doing real graphics. You know, the machines supported floating point computation. There were real physics simulations. And it started to, I was always interested in pretty pictures, and the gaming hardware had gotten to the point where it could produce pictures pretty enough for me to get interested in working there. So I spent quite a while in the gaming industry. I was at a big publisher called THQ, overlooking a lot of development from kind of a bunch of licensed properties having to do with Nickelodeon and Disney and Warner Brothers and Pixar. And eventually I felt I was a little bit far removed from development, and so I went to Electronic Arts. At Electronic Arts, I was the CTO at the Los Angeles studio. And there we had some really big franchises: Medal of Honor, which was a big shooter franchise, Command and Conquer. And so that was very interesting for me, being at a large corporation like that, kind of seeing content produced at a very large scale. And at the time, I reconnected with Neville, who's the founder of Weaver. He was at Electronic Arts at the time. And he started Weaver, and we started talking about doing something together. And when VR really started to take off after a period we call the Kickstarter, which is before Oculus was founded, but the first development headsets were being funded by a Kickstarter campaign, is when I came and joined Weaver, and we started focusing almost exclusively on virtual reality. So for me, it was a kind of the third major technology. I had been relatively early in the VFX industry when computer graphics really started to dominate effects in movies. From there, I kind of went to the game industry when the kind of 3D gaming really exploded with PlayStation 2, past the PlayStation 1 era. And now in VR, it feels like kind of the third wave of a blend of kind of VFX technologies and interactive technologies to create yet another kind of new thing. So that's what I really found appealing about it.
Great, thanks.
Hey everyone. I have a much more roundabout, less linear career experience. I'm originally from Los Angeles. I actually started my career in the Army, where I jumped around quite a lot, though I was primarily stationed up in Washington State. After about 5 years, decided to get out. Then lived off and on in China, in a few different cities, mainly studying the language, but also running a small and totally unsuccessful translation business. Came back from China, and after having spent most of my career at that point in the military, had no real practical experience in anything that you could consider business. And so I decided, not having any idea what I was getting into, to work in investment banking, which I did for a few years in New York. Later moved to San Francisco and Seattle, where I got more on the technology investment and advisory side. And then, having gotten up enough courage and really the clarity, decided to venture out on my own and start my own business. I did that for about 5 years, primarily focused on running an e-commerce and digital magazine. The common theme there was that we were very heavily into covering music and art. We did a lot of original digital content creation. After a few years, we sold that business. Had no idea what I wanted to do, but my interest in VR really came when I went back to business school. I was at Stanford. The VR lab there is just phenomenal, and it was there that I got my first real glimpse into this next generation of just beautiful, high quality VR. So when I left Stanford, went to another VR studio called Penrose Studios, which also makes just tremendous content. And after there, I met the folks at Weaver, and really what sealed the deal for me was just listening to them talk about their strategy for the business, and obviously just seeing the caliber of the content that I've made, or that they made. But my interest in storytelling is it dates back to when I was a kid. I mean, I grew up wanting to be a writer, love science fiction and music. I come from an entire family of people who, in some form or another, work in art or entertainment. But the decision really was quite simple. It was seeing the products, especially the stuff that I was seeing coming out of Weaver, and thinking that it was just really beautiful, and I wanted to be a part of creating that. And that's where I've been for the past 3 years or so.
That's fantastic. I love the passion that both of you follow to get to where you are. And so with that, maybe we can have you share with us what you saw in Weaver and what Weaver's currently working on.
Yeah, I think it's easy to describe what we do, but very difficult to do any justice to the products. So before getting into our more prepared remarks, I figured we'd start with what really put us on the map as a VR company. Although I want to specify that Weaver is not merely a virtual reality company, but the product I'm about to show you a trailer of is really what put us on the map in the industry, and it's the first experience that I saw, which really helped seal the deal for me to join Weaver. So, Kathy, if you can fire up that first trailer, just by way of quick introduction, this is called The Blue. That experience, as I mentioned, is called The Blue. Why don't we pull up the set of slides that we've got now that you all have some context for what we create. As I mentioned, I'm Shane. I lead business development, operations, and finance at Weaver. I also serve in a production executive or EP role on some of our projects, meaning I'm often involved in evaluating pitches, talent, and companies who want to work with us, helping to develop concepts for new originals. I do quite a bit of work in production finance. And increasingly, my job has entailed developing strategies and business models for some of the future products that are coming out. Let's see, there we go. For those unfamiliar with who we are, in short, we specialize in creating immersive worlds, which for us really means producing and distributing interactive entertainment. And though we are, I think, by far most well known for our VR content, such as the Blue, which you just saw, our core capability is really in developing very detail-rich, interactive, computer-generated worlds for any kind of device. And in fact, by way of very quick history, for the first 5 years or so of the company's existence, starting in about 2010, we actually didn't build any VR products at all. Instead, focusing on more traditional mobile and web products, then getting into the world of VR really as a way to gain velocity with some of the new immersive technology coming out. Also because we just thought it was super cool. And of course, then we've done a range of fairly high-profile products in the VR space. Happen to be more excited about it now than ever. But now really have our sights set on the expanded set of opportunities in the broader immersive industry, whether that's VR or AR, dome projection, or really anything with a screen. From an idea generation standpoint, at a high level, we create these worlds either as original IP, again, like the Blue, or we will help create them in partnership with studios and consumer brands who come to Weaver looking to bring their existing franchises into an immersive medium. And we worked with a number of companies on projects like this, from Adult Swim and Sports Illustrated to Universal Pictures and Google and Vulcan. From a distribution standpoint, we make our content available typically either online through platforms like Steam or Oculus, or until COVID-19 through retail locations in the form of location-based entertainment, or LBE, which you'll hear me say throughout the presentation. So I've got a few adjectives up here on the screen to describe what we mean when we say virtual worlds. But I think what it all boils down to for us is the belief that more and more what people are going to really want is to totally immerse themselves in the worlds they love, whether that's a Fortnite or a Roblox or a Star Wars, or in the case of the Blue, a completely digital representation of a real world environment with the purpose of educating and inspiring people and allowing them to have the type of experiences that they most often could never even hope to attain in the real world, whether because of cost or inconvenience, or even because of the danger involved. And that was a primary motivation, I think, behind the creation of the Blue. It may go without saying that we imagine these worlds as fully distinct from what is available with traditional web and mobile products, and certainly from traditional linear entertainment. And if Fortnite is any early indication, we believe these virtual worlds represent the next generation's preferred entertainment medium, where games aren't merely play spaces, but social networks in themselves for people to come and spend time together, converse with one another, and where your actions as the participant directly influence the characters, the worlds they live in, and if there's a narrative, how the story unfolds. Of course, we're still at the beginning of this trend, despite all the recent growth that Derek was just talking about. Meaning that as with any new technological wave, there's been a lot of excitement and then letdown and then renewed excitement about the prospects for mass market adoption. I think VR is a perfect example of this. But it also implies that only now is it really becoming possible to create immersive worlds at a truly high level of fidelity and scale. Weaver is one of a small handful of companies, I think, with the expertise to develop these kinds of worlds. One final point I'd make is about the idea of these worlds being cross-platform, which is to say that, going forward for us, we really aim to build our franchises from the very beginning to truly be able to meet people where they are, whether that's in a headset or even on a mobile device on their TVs, or at an experiential entertainment center. So imagine, for example, watching your favorite sci-fi movie on your computer and then being able to immediately jump into that scene that you're watching if you've got a headset at home. So now let's look at where the industry is today. Up on the right here, we've selected 3 key areas which correspond very broadly to our own product lines. The first is traditional VR products, a proxy for which we're just calling Immersive here. This is where the company has really established a foothold in the present day with franchises like the Blue. You can think of this as encompassing online or in-home VR products, location-based entertainment, or LBE, which until COVID started melting the world, was becoming quite a promising area for us. The Blue, for example, has been quite a hit at places like museums and educational centers. The prime differentiator between LBE and online VR products is that whereas online products are typically geared for extended gameplay with minimal hardware, LBE products are designed really to be multi-person experiences that are full body in nature, optimized for a much bigger play space, and often condensed into a shorter length to maximize throughput. And then lastly, we've got immersive software or games, which for us in the future really represents everything from augmented reality to interactive products for web and mobile platforms. People have long been enamored by the macro state of the space, particularly when you include traditional gaming in your view of the industry. But we've been in the thick of these converging sectors at Weaver for the last 5 years, and for many of us like Marcel, for much longer. And during that time, we've observed a few important trends that are particularly relevant to us as an organization. The first is, younger generations' media consumption has increasingly shifted from real to virtual, from linear to interactive, and in the case of retail, from very product-based to experiential. Creators, IP holders, brands, they all recognize this shift and the need to embrace immersive media, but often lack the expertise or the P&L to really deliver it themselves. Meanwhile, you've got hardware manufacturers and telcos who are driving new spatial computing infrastructure, but they often lack high-value content to drive adoption of the new technology and services. So we are big believers at Weaver that the next multi-billion-dollar entertainment franchises will be gamified experiences set in these immersive worlds. So, the translation for us is really that the business itself of virtual world creation presents a tremendous long-term opportunity that is rapidly developing. And even if you look at, pure play VR experiences and, in themselves, we are finally, to Derek's earlier point, seeing signs of exponential growth. I think some of you that are on the webinar today either work in or are familiar with the VR space, but for those of you who are not, I'm just going to throw out a few statistics. By the end of 2019, over 100 VR titles had earned at least $1 million in sales. Just 2 years prior to that, only 40 titles had accomplished the same feat. Of those 100 titles, 7 titles earned over 10 million in annual sales, and the top selling title, to my knowledge, grossed over 40 million, and that was just in a matter of a few weeks after its release. So in 2019, total software sales increased by 3 times to 300 million, coming up to 2020. And one of the encouraging things for us is to recognize that, many of titles were made by developers like Weaver, which seems to imply that the big mobile and PC incumbents don't seem to have an inherent or unfair advantage when it comes to content creation. And now analysts are predicting that 2020 will actually be the first year that a VR title breaks 100 million in annual sales. So what all of this is really telling us is that we are finally seeing signs of a sustainable ecosystem emerging in the VR space with real potential for repeatable revenue. Obviously, when it comes to location-based on the entertainment, it's no surprise that the industry is all but dead for now. But as an optimist, my instinct that once people feel safe to venture out of their homes again, the sector will come absolutely roaring back. And when it does, I think we'll see digital comprise a much bigger part of the experience at malls, museums, airports, theme parks, many of which prior to the pandemic were increasingly reaching out to Weaver to help them rethink traditional attractions as immersive digital shows. But the fact is, what we're seeing as a result of the pandemic is an acceleration of the trend for everything to go digital. So I think the bigger opportunity in our minds is being able to deliver many aspects of even location-based entertainment directly to you at home, whether that's a virtual concert or even something as ambitious as some virtual version of something akin to Disneyland or a theme park. Okay, so here are a few products that we're active on today. 3 examples of 3 entirely different products from a style, distribution, and deal perspective. The first, the Blue, is 100% Weaver-owned franchise. It's also a great example of what we mean when we say cross-platform development. The Blue actually first came out, I think, in 2012 as a mobile app. It then became a VR product in 2016, which to this day is still largely considered the go-to experience to introduce people to high-quality VR. That's the clip that you saw in the beginning. At the end of 2018, we released the Blue Deep Rescue, a thumbnail for which you can see here. And it's an entirely separate product from the initial version of the Blue, again, which you saw earlier. And that's a 6-person location-based entertainment experience available at select shopping centers throughout the world, which are all but closed right now for obvious reasons, and operated by our partner Dreamscape. In the middle, we've got the forthcoming Gnomes and Goblins, which is a co-creation with the filmmaker Jon Favreau, and which will be released in the coming months and feature up to several hours of gameplay. That's intended to start off as an in-home experience, but we have ambitions to bring that to other formats as well. And then finally on the right is an unannounced but very high-profile project that we are quite excited about, which represents the type of corporate partnerships that we engage in from time to time. And for this deal, a major film studio asked us to develop an immersive world around one of their all-time best-selling movie franchises. So they're all very different, but I think what each of these examples shares is our goal to keep these products relevant well after their initial release in hopes of making them what we like to call forever franchises. By continuing to build on the worlds well after they've launched with expansion packs, downloadable content, and of course with the goal of making them available on a variety of different devices. So I'm going to turn over to Marcel, but before I do that, I want to give you guys a quick glimpse of these first 2 products just so that you can see what's on the horizon for us. Kathy, can you pull up the first video for the Blue, please?
Welcome, team. I'll be leading you on an important mission. Below us, there's a pod of whales that needs our help. There's just one problem. We don't know what else is down there.
Thanks, Kathy. So, as you can see, entirely different products from a stylistic standpoint. Again, the blue is a location-based entertainment experience. So the goal is to go to a location, you pay for a ticket, you get to experience that with multiple friends. And Gnomes and Goblins is more of an in-home product for now, but much longer gameplay experience. And we're quite excited about it. So with that, Marcel, take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Shane. Going a little bit off of, if you could switch slide. Oh, actually, I can do that. There you go. So back to the slide that Shane showed a little bit. What are immersive worlds? When we look at the technology that we're working on, a lot of it kind of goes into this desire to build immersive worlds. And worlds, it used to be that you built an entertainment property, you made a game, you shipped it, and you move on to the next game. And the first kind of example where it really worked quite differently was World of Warcraft, which launched about 15 years ago. And it was this massively multiplayer game, and all of a sudden, groups of people were gathering every night, their little clans, and even people who weren't that interested in the game, that became kind of a social circle and a social activity. And that has kind of transformed that concept, a lot of the interactive space. You look at games like Minecraft, you look at games like, or platforms like Roblox, you look at Fortnite. People go there not just to do the interactive experience. They go there to hang out. They expect their friends to be there as well. And they expect an environment that isn't just static. It's not the same thing every time. They want that world to evolve. They've invested in a social group that is around these experiences, whatever those experiences are. And, that investment kind of makes more sense in an environment that kind of grows with that social experience. And so a lot of these features that we talk about in immersive worlds, they have to do with the kind of experience that we want to build, but they also have to do with the fact that we want that world to keep growing and evolving, and other experiences on other kinds of screens to take place in that same world, but allow the social group to kind of migrate from one to the other. So, we try to distill out a couple technologies that we really try to focus on. So one of them obviously has to do with characters. Characters are a really important part of storytelling. There are entertainment experiences that don't have characters, but a dot on a screen can be a character with personality in the hands of the artists. And so all of the experiences that we work on have strong characters. And as we entered the VR space, we found that these characters needed a kind of a depth to them that was far more demanding than had been in our previous experience in the games world. And part of that had to do with the fact that VR, you're kind of up close. When you put on the VR headset, you're in that world. The action is much more about the details and your presence in that space. And all of a sudden, the characters that you interact with, they need to be smarter. On a flat screen, it used to be that, hey, if that character turned its head and kind of looked in your direction, that was acknowledgement of your presence. Well, that doesn't work in VR because you can kind of tell that he's looking 1 foot off to the left. That character needs to actually make eye contact with you, and they need to make eye contact at the right time and for the right length of time for it not to feel kind of bad. And so we started evolving a bunch of technologies or understanding about what our AI characters kind of need to behave like. And it turns out that actually translates to flat screens as well. It's not just about VR. It is about kind of the next level of characters all across the board. So when we say directable characters, content creators in the past have spent a huge amount of time and effort on animation, on state tables, on technology that kind of marries this animation with the button presses. And to be honest, it's been a very painstakingly handcrafted kind of process that has created great results, but from a kind of a economic standpoint, it's just too expensive and too slow a process. So what we're looking at is really moving that one step up. We want the characters to be more responsive. We want the characters to feel more real, but at the same time, we also want to move them to where a lot of these behaviors have been abstracted out, and now they're being directed at a higher level, kind of an emotional level and a purpose level, rather than just play this animation, blend into this animation at a very manual process. So that feeds into avatars. Now, avatar is your representation on screen. And as Shane mentioned, we did this experience, Deep Rescue. And in Deep Rescue, you go to a location with your friends, you put on a backpack that feels like a scuba tank, and now you see your body. You're in a skin suit, and you can go in and see your friends there. Your body is being tracked. It is exactly like being under the water. You can high five your friends. You can touch them. And it becomes very, very important what this digital representation of you feels and behaves like compared to what it is that your real body is doing. If your hand isn't in exactly the same position, you will notice it. If your feet aren't doing the same thing, you will notice it. And there's a lot of technology around that. And one of the things that is happening is that as a VR moved into a place where the headsets have inside-out tracking, they have cameras looking outwards in order to be able to tell where they are, this inside-out tracking is now being used to do hand tracking, and we're not that far away where it's actually going to be tracking your lower body as well. So even at your in-home experience in VR, you are going to have an avatar that's going to be extremely responsive. And a lot of tech that we've been working on in our location-based experiences is going to feed into the in-home experiences as well as these avatars become more ubiquitous. And it's odd, but that feeds back into those digital characters. Because when I'm in an experience where I am the controller, it's not me about holding a controller and pushing button presses, and the digital characters are responding to my button presses. It's me sitting there, and there's some sort of tracking system, whether it's a webcam at my computer or that I'm in a VR and knows my hands and head are doing, is I expect the characters to respond to me. I expect them to be threatened if I move quickly towards them, and there's no button press involved. They're reading my intent. And there's this technology kind of feedback loop between the directable characters and the avatars where they're interpreting my intent from what my avatar is doing. And it actually is a technology loop that is pretty tight, because having an instrumented world, whether it's in VR or whether it is at my home or whether it's in front of my computer, is kind of now the new normal. It is those sensors and that instrumentation is becoming more ubiquitous. The microphone is listening to me, the webcam is watching me, the headset can tell where I'm moving and what I'm doing. And all of that contributes to a more realistic, immersive world using that sensor data for the simulation. And that takes to the next step of technology, which are the responsive world simulations. Part of that responsiveness is about building a world where it's more believable and more immersive. But part of it is also about just being able to build that world more efficiently. When I was at EA, and EA has Madden and it has FIFA, and you drop a new game and your first day you sell 6 million units, it's not a problem building together teams of hundreds of people to make assets and everything, because you kind of the economics of it work out. But in VR, which is all about details and it's all about richness of interactions, that is expensive to build. It takes time. It takes time of animation time. It takes engineering time. And you don't want to have to rebuild it every time. You don't want to have to build it for every screen. Whether it's the interactive phone AR app, or whether it's the self-contained VR Quest app, or whether it's the high-end PC Oculus app. And so you start thinking about, how do you author things that they're rich and they're detailed, but they can be incrementally have their behaviors changed, and they don't have to be reauthored when, hey, I moved this rock from this side to this side.
Sorry.
Excuse me, I'm the only person here and I have to sign for delivery. Shane?
Last name.
Samek, S-A-M-E-K.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Oops, sorry about that. It's the COVID era. So in responsive world simulations, you're building authoring tools that, hey, in the blue, the fish actually understand how to school their behavior, so that when somebody moves a cliff and moves it from the left to the right, the fish now all behave the right way, and no animator had to get involved, no designer had to go involved to change that behavior. But at the same time, if an animator wants to go in and say, from a story purpose, I need a shark to swim from the left to the right, well, they can do that, and magically the fish know how to avoid the shark, and they know that here's a threatening fish that they should stay away on. And so we have actually built these kind of behaviors. Same thing in the goblin forest. Not everything is hand animated. There are systems in place that allow content creators to expand out the story, to expand out the narrative without having to go recreate the fine details that actually users expect to see these days manually. So that's really when we're talking about responsive world simulations. Part of it is about feature set that users can see, but part of it is also about efficiencies of authoring. And all of that kind of loops back in, because when my engineering team builds new technology, you validate that technology on one or two products first. That helps you kind of abstract out what is the kernel that you really are going to apply to different products. Then you make that technology in a way that it takes the engineers out of the loop, and now the designers and the artists can operate that technology and kind of tell a narrative or make the experience richer. And when that's kind of flushed out, you understand that well enough, then you take that and you turn that into kind of a UGC type scenario, where that technology becomes a feature in the experience, and now your users can create content. And that is a pretty common technology loop. And you can't really short circuit it. It's really hard to say, I'm going to create a tool for UGC creation, and I'm going to skip those steps of my own artists trying to create real experiences with it and kind of having worked through the technology issues. So all of these things kind of connect, and we use them as a lens as to what it is that we're going to focus on from a technology side. And to be honest, the fact that VR is something we've been focusing on, and it has been a small market, has really kind of helped sharpen our use of that lens, because you don't have an infinite market size, you don't have an infinite budgets on projects to decide, to chase all of these things. So it really helps focus you in terms of what is it that are the next steps in kind of your technology base that's going to build richer and richer worlds. So that's kind of my brief overview of what we focus on.
This is fantastic. It seems like it's the perfect time for all of this, because you have these large gaming platforms like Fortnite. There's a social media, social component to it. It has an ecosystem of its own, and it sounds like from a technical perspective, VR is closer and closer to being able to ubiquitously and economically deliver on some of the experiences that you're conveying. When do you think all of this kind of comes together? Because I think we see the discrete components, but they haven't been kind of pulled together.
I think that so you can see the gray hair. I've been through a bunch of launches of different platforms, and the interesting thing has been that as the game consoles launched, you were kind of limited in what you could do. When the PlayStation 1 came out, you couldn't throw a 100-person team at it and spend $100 million to make a piece of content, because the thing only had a megabyte or whatever it was of memory, and it only had a CD that you could deliver your content on. So it was the device constrained you. And the same was true of the PlayStation 2. And historically, as gaming devices came out, that was kind of the limiting factor. You had to figure out how to do the next thing given what you were given to work with. VR is a little bit different. It's because the hardware is actually really capable, especially the PC-based VR. The limiting factor has been the market size. I don't think that we have tapped the current generation of hardware in any sort of way. What we've tapped is kind of the feasible budgets that we can throw at it. But in terms of the wealth and the richness of the experiences we could create, we could go much, much further. And so it's been a little bit difference in that regard. So, I think that, there's a lot to work with, and there's an awful lot from the technology side that is already in place. And, as a technologist, I'm just like hoping for that market to and it has been taking off, as your slides pointed out, to really take off, that we can justify doing some of this.
Fantastic. So with that, I'll yield to Guillaume, who has some questions from our audience.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Derek, Shane, Marcel. Great. The discussion was amazing. Thank you so much for this. It reminded me, of discussions I heard from John Dassenfer at Pixar, talking about how the creative team was getting inspired by the engineering team and how the engineering team was being challenged by the creative team. So it's great. And, and Murphy's Law is applying for me right now because there's construction, on the apartment right above mine. So my apologies. So we have a few questions. I propose that we just do 2 of those. And if anyone in the audience would like to continue the discussion, feel free to email us, and we'll forward the questions to the Weaver team. One of them is more around the technology, and it's about the role of 5G in virtual reality and the adoption of virtual reality. How do you see, and maybe that's a question for Marcel, what role does 5G have in expanding virtual reality to large number of people, and how do you see the two technology and VR working together?
Yeah, I think that we've been looking at 5G a lot, and there is a obvious connection between 5G and edge compute and VR. And the reason is 5G moves an awful lot of data. There's a lot of pixels going to the screen. It needs a high refresh rate. It's like having 2 4K monitors on your head and running at least 90 frames per second. And the second is that it's very latency sensitive. The nature of it, because it covers your face and takes away reality, people get motion sickness if the latency gets too excessive. So, as soon as people started talking about edge compute and 5G, there was a natural kind of tendency to talk about VR because it seemed like a great use case. And I think that in terms of rendering in the cloud, services like Stadia or services like GeForce Now, those are an obvious use case for a VR as well. Hey, I don't want to have a multi-$1,000 PC at home, but I want to see the world-class graphics that, I need 1,000 watts of computing power, and, which is more than the 10 watts of computing power I can strap to my head. So I think that there's clearly a connection there, and I think that there are hurdles to cross. The latency issues are pretty severe, even with 5G. When 5G people talk about low latency and VR people talk about low latency, they're talking about slightly different numbers. But I do think that we will see it. I think it's inevitable that we will see rendering of experiences in the kind of at the edge and being delivered to the headset and not being rendered entirely in the headset. And maybe we'll see it at the corporate campus first, where they have their own kind of 5G network over there. But I think it's inevitable because, beautiful graphics at high frame rates take a lot of computing power, and there's only so many watts of computing power that you will see kind of at your head rather than at the edge.
Yeah, just to add on to that,
Yep.
being able to get these types of experiences without requiring the hardware, whether it's strapping a PC to your back or having to expend huge sums of money for a PC at home, removes a huge barrier for a lot of people. I mean, we've been able to make very high quality content for some years now, but one of the big obstacles for people is making that investment, not just the money, but the time to set up some of the infrastructure that you need at the home can be quite cumbersome, especially if you don't have a lot of technological experience. So there's quite a bit of promise offered in being able to stream content using 5G.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for this. Maybe last question before we wrap up for you, Shane, maybe more. It's about the virtual world. So you mentioned virtual worlds being the next generation of entertainment, but some people are wondering, what about the office? Are we going to be able to have team meetings inside the forest of gnomes and goblins anytime soon? I mean, how do you see that those experiences getting into outside of the home and into the office?
Yeah, well, team meetings, we do from time to time hold some meetings in virtual spaces. I think the problem now is that you can't see people's facial expressions. So you are not able to have that same level of, or feel that same level of presence and connection with people. That said, being in a room that feels like you are in an actual space with people, where people are in a certain direction, does provide an element that you lose with things like Zoom. And to what we alluded to earlier, we view these worlds not just as places to come and play a game, but to really hang out and converse with people. And we're already seeing that happen on platforms like Fortnite. So that's very much the intent with experiences like Gnomes and Goblins, not in the short term, but eventually as we expand the worlds, we want people to come and just mill it out if they want, where they're not necessarily on a specific mission that's game directed.
And I think to throw a little bit in there, I think that one of the big differences is the sensors that are coming into play. When the headsets that have inside out tracking and they have cameras looking at the room, at first they were just used so you didn't have to send up any sort of tracking cameras or anything like that. But pretty soon after that, we got hand tracking because they could do the hand tracking. Well, the next step's going to be that even if I'm in VR or something, they can tell where the furniture is. So, if I've got a chair there, if I want to be in a virtual world, it'll put a chair there so I can really sit down in my real chair, wherever it happens to be in my living room. Facebook at the last Oculus Connect, they already detected technology where they can use the sensors to look at your lower face and tell whether you're smiling or not. And with machine learning, it's not that much of a stretch to extrapolate that to the rest of the face. We already have eye tracking, which is a really powerful kind of emotion conveying technology. So I think that we're kind of getting there, and a lot of it has to do with all of these sensors that we have to kind of help place people into that world.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much. So I think we'll continue for all the questions we couldn't ask. My apologies. So we'll continue the discussion offline, and I'll give it back to you. Thanks again, Shane, Marcel. I'll give it back to you, Derek.
Really appreciate the insight into all of the challenges that you're solving, and for giving us a peek into the future. So I'd like to invite everyone to join our other webinars in the Next Normal series from Orange Silicon Valley, and also our sessions from the Business Resilience in All Times series from our colleagues at Orange Business Services. The link to the content should be in the chat window. If the sessions have already passed, you will find the links in the replay. If you'd like to learn more about Orange Business Services, Orange Silicon Valley, and our X-Force program, please contact Ellen Crown and David Martin. I'd like to thank our guests, Marcel and Shane from Weaver, again for giving us a peek into their vision of the future. Thank you all for joining us for this session today. I wish you all good luck during these times. Be well.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.